Hello, everyone. Thank you again for your patience. My name is Cecile McGuire. I'm the Associate Director, North America for the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Queensland. I've got some great current students who are joining us today to answer some of your questions. So we've got some set questions we'll start with, and then please feel free to submit any questions you have about studying medicine and living in Australia and so on. Please feel free to submit those on the chat function, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can in our allotted time. I just wanted to preface the question and answer portion by saying I know there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment around whether or not international students will be able to return or enter Australia in January 2021. So what I can tell you is that our preference is to have students back on campus for face-to-face teaching. And our senior leadership group at the Faculty of Medicine is all working very, very hard to make that a possibility. We don't have any firm decisions that we can communicate to you at this time, but as soon as we are able to, we will let our incoming students know what January 2021 is going to look like. So please feel free to ask questions about that, but unfortunately I can't give you any more certainty than that in these uncertain times. I'm going to introduce our current students now. I'm going to start with Donald Chang. Donald Chang is one of our Ochsner students, and he's president of the Ochsner Medical Students Association. From Ochsner, we also have Brandon Ward and Priya Puri. So they'll be able to talk to you a lot about both studying at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, but also what life is like at the Ochsner Clinical School in New Orleans. And then our lone non-Ochsner student is Jackie Bovard, who is a fourth-year Canadian student here with us in Brisbane. So I might just get started. Donald, I introduced you first. I might just come to you first. Donald, I'm going to ask you to talk about, your personal decision to study medicine at the University of Queensland, because I think it was a challenging decision for you, and how you made the decision to choose UQ and Ochsner for medical school.
Thanks, Cecile. Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. So I'm your classic non-traditional to begin with. I'm a bit older. I had a career or two before deciding on medicine. So for me, when I was looking at medical schools, I came across UQ because a friend of mine actually went to University of Queensland. He had just finished, just matched, and I spoke with him over the phone about it. What I was looking for in a medical school at the time was I wanted to look at a school that had a bit of traditional allopathic training. I also wanted a school that would have good research opportunities because that was part of my background. I was very much into it, and of course, a very unique experience. And most importantly, for U.S. graduates, match. So, in a nutshell, UQ Ochsner kind of fit that bill. And so that helped me go along with it. And there's a lot that we can discuss about that I'm sure you guys have questions about it, deciding between Ochsner or deal schools and all that stuff. So that's my journey to UQ Ochsner in a nutshell. And I was introduced to it through someone that went through the program.
Thank you. And you mentioned research, and I think both research, looking at medical schools, but also research when you are a medical student. And Priya, you joined us recently via video talking about your research with Professor Ely at a recent webinar. And I wonder if you would maybe want to talk about some of your decisions around choosing UQ medicine for the research opportunities.
Sure. So I mostly chose UQ because I really wanted a global international experience. I was a public health major before and focused on global health and traveled a lot. So I just wanted to incorporate that part into my medical education. And obviously, as I guess said in that video, there are plenty of research opportunities here and at Ochsner. And I just thought trying to combine the two would be really great. I'm currently not doing any research here, but I did a lot before, and I'm planning on starting some, streamlining it when I get to Ochsner.
That's great. Thank you very much. And you can go and view that webinar that we ran a couple of weeks ago. The recording is available on our website. One of the things that we like to mention is Dr. Ian Fraser, who is at UQ, is one of the co-creators of the Gardasil vaccine. And we also have a number of UQ colleagues who are currently working on a vaccine for COVID-19. So there's a lot of research opportunities. Brandon, I expect we're going to get, sorry, Bria, do you want to add something?
I just saw a question in the chat about MD candidates doing bench research or only clinical, and you can definitely do both, either one.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. There's a number of research opportunities that are available. Brandon, I wanted to throw a question to you about USMLE steps, because we do get lots of questions about students, US students in particular, who are either in the Austrian program or not, are looking to apply for residency training in the US. Can you talk to us about your experience with sitting USMLE step 1 and preparing for step 2?
Yeah, definitely. So going through, your first 2 years is kind of where you're learning a lot of your, your meats and potatoes for your USMLE step 1. And you're given in your first year a book that's called, I actually have mine, but it's called the USMLE First Aid. Pretty much you kind of work through that alongside of your classes at UQ as well, and you'll find that they go hand in hand. If you know that book very well, you'll also be very prepared for your classes. Alongside of that, UQ also offers separate tutorials led by, your student peers, and they'll kind of set lesson plans and give you rundowns of different topics. So I know I personally led one when I was in second year for the first years, and that tends to be how it kind of goes. So you go through there, you prepare with classmates, and then you do 2 months kind of a dedicated study time where you're really kind of focusing on doing the question sets for USMLE. So you'll do that for about a month or two, and just kind of work through the question sets, which are pretty big question banks, but everybody kind of works through it together. And overall, we had very good USMLE scores. It seems like a daunting task overall, but if you just kind of break it down to small goals, it's doable.
That's great. And Brandon, just a question came through asking if non-Austrian students can access tutorials for USMLE at UQ if they're interested in sitting USMLE.
Definitely. So anybody's welcome to these. They're totally open for anybody. Myself, as well as another student, Harry Copeland, who he's a Australian domestic student. We actually helped lead one in biochemistry. And so he planned on sitting USMLE step 1. He did very well, and so he just kind of wanted to keep his options open to see where what he wanted to do in the future.
Great, thank you, Brandon. Jackie, I wonder if I can ask you to talk about your experience in phase 2 particular at some of the clinical sites in Brisbane, and also about some of the opportunities for international students at our rural clinical school.
Yeah, sure. So phase 2, I guess, in the UQ medical program is your, I guess, like quote unquote, like clinical years. So those are the years that you'll basically spend your entire time in the hospital rotating through different rotations throughout your 3rd and 4th year. So I've been in 2 different hospitals throughout the year, which has been really nice just to kind of experience different hospital settings. One was really big, one was a bit smaller. There's a lot of options within Brisbane in terms of hospitals that you preference. And then now, or I guess there's also rural clinical schools that UQ has. And I think they have about 4 different places where students can go as well. And actually this year was the first year they opened up one of those rural clinical schools to international students, which I think was a really, really great opportunity for you to go rural if that was something you're interested in. So one of the clinical schools, Rockhampton, now offers that as an opportunity for your 3rd or 4th year, or 3rd and 4th year, depending on what you're interested in. So I had a couple friends that decided to do that who are international, and they're really enjoying it. But if you want to stay in the city, like if you want to stay in the Brisbane area, there's lots of opportunities for you to stay there as well.
That's great, thank you. So just having a quick look at the questions on the chat line, the students asking, they're going to graduate in May 2021, and when is the earliest enrollment possible? So our academic calendar reflects the calendar. So we have one intake a year, and that's in late January. So if you're graduating in May 2021, our application cycle begins to open then in terms of inviting students to MMIs and issuing offers, and then you would start in the January 2022 intake. We also have a question on the chat line, and Brandon, I might ask you to talk about this one. If you finish the program in November, how do you reconcile the Australian academic cycle with the American residencies for match that run from July to June?
Yeah, so we finish our program in November, and then you match, or you're applying, your applications for us this year, they're pushed back a little bit. So October 21st is our due date, slightly pushed back because of COVID. But essentially what happens is you graduate, you take your final exams in November, you graduate in December, and then you have this 6-month kind of gap until you start normally a lot of places are doing orientations in June and then start on July 1. During those 6 months, you're free to do anything you'd like. So you can choose to travel, you can choose to kind of enjoy your life, which a lot of people do, considering that you're getting ready to go into your intern year. Other options, a lot of people will choose to do, there's research fellowships that you can do for the 6 months. People will just work and save money, prepare to move. Me personally, I'm looking at getting a tech job at a hospital in anesthesia since I want to do anesthesiology. And so that just kind of keeps me in the field. But it's actually kind of nice because it also allows you if you're going into US residencies, it allows you to have 6 months of free time where you can take the step 3 exam. Now that's an exam you have to pass by the end of your intern year. And you'll see a lot of your normal domestic interns who are sitting there and they kind of, they're exhausted, they're struggling, they're doing their work throughout the day, writing their notes until 10 p.m. and then staying up till 2 a.m. to study for the USMLE step 3. Now they always kind of, the ones that the interns that I talk to, they talk about us like it's kind of nice that we have the 6 months off to where we can really just kind of knock that out, and it's not a thing that's on your mind anymore through your intern year, and you can just get straight to work.
That's great. Thank you very much. Donald, I've got a question specifically for you, one of the attendees who is a non-traditional student, and asking about your transition to UQ from full-time work. Was there a lot of faculty support? What was the application process like for you? And then I also wanted to have a two-part question, if I could, because someone's asking about how the larger class size affected your medical education, and you might want to talk about the transition from UQ to Ochsner as well.
Yeah, so I'll start off. I actually just typed in the answer to the full-time one, but I'll recap that. So transitioning from full-time to UQ, for me personally, I didn't need faculty involvement. I was working full-time before, and I just made my own arrangements, put in my notice, and just arranged a timeline so that I would have enough time to prepare for the move to Australia. I will say that if you're working full-time, it's good to give yourself a break before starting medical school. Medical school is definitely a marathon. It's not just the 4 years, there's training afterwards as well. So I think giving yourself some time to relax from your full-time job and just prepare for the big move, I think is very healthy and very important. And then the other two-part question was about the large class size, is that right? So that was actually a question I had as well when I started. I know that UQ usually has large cohorts of medical students. I was very happy to hear, and also personally going through that experience, that I didn't feel hindered at all in my learning from the large class sizes. There are smaller breakout learning groups called case-based learning groups that you go into. They're about groups of 10 on average. And that's really your cohort for learning in your first 2 years at Brisbane. And I found that to be very helpful. That's kind of like your little family, and it's also very diverse. I'm gonna requote what one of our attendings told us once, which is, it's very rare to have in the same room of 10 people, to have Australians, Americans, Canadians, all collaborating, all learning together. It's a very unique aspect of UQ that I found to be very beneficial for my learning. And then when you transfer to Ochsner itself, that is definitely a transformative process as well. you're going now from the classroom to learning in the hospitals. And from there, your clinical group sizes are usually, I was never in a group larger than three students in New Orleans. And I think, Brandon, you probably agree, they're usually even two or even just yourself when you're on the clinical wards. And that's very important, I think, to take what everything you've learned, all that hard studying you've done in the books, and apply it in the clinical setting. You get a lot of one-on-one attention from the residents, from the attendings, and all the mentors that you meet.
Thank you, that was great. So got a question here about finance. It's asking about scholarships for the MD program and so on. And so I'll just preface any response from our panelists by saying there is no UQ institutional financial aid. That's not a common thing in Australia. And international students in Australia are required to pay full fees. But Priya, I might ask you to talk more about how you budgeted for med school and so on. So we are accredited for US financial aid. The majority of US students and Canadian students, as well are on some form of financial aid. But Priya, could you talk more about how you budgeted for studying medicine?
Sure, I can try. So I did take out the US education loans. And UQ basically takes out your tuition from that, and the rest gets deposited in your bank account. And the main things I had to budget for were living expenses. And in Australia, they actually take out rent every week. It's pretty comparable to other big cities in the US, maybe even a little cheaper with the exchange rate. But yeah, they're also pretty flexible. I know right now a lot of the second years are feeling a little bit of financial burden because we have to plan traveling back to the US, moving back, paying for USMLE Step 1 registration. And talking to UQ Financial Aid, they're giving us more money in our loans. So they're pretty flexible with that. And I never really felt too much financial pressure.
Thank you. And yes, our financial aid office is very astute at calculating cost of attendance and is able to factor in additional costs like test registration costs and so on. Jackie, we've got a question asking about, well, first of all, asking about how travel restrictions are affecting students who want to undertake clinical rotations or observerships internationally. And I'll just preface Jackie's response by saying at the moment, the university is not allowing any international travel. But Jack, did you maybe want to talk about any opportunities that you undertook before the travel restrictions to do an observership outside of UQ?
Yeah, for sure. So as Cecile said, unfortunately with the travel restrictions and coronavirus, we aren't able to be doing international electives or observerships. But prior to that, UQ, and my experience, it was really good to get international experience in observership. So I did my observership after first year in Canada. I did 2 rotations in my third year in Canada. So I did GP and a rural and remote. And then this year, I'm in my 4th year, I was supposed to do my elective, but once again, travel restrictions obviously didn't allow me to. And then UQ also offers rotations with Queen's University in Ontario. So in 3rd year, you can do a rotation called Medicine and Society. And I think at Queen's, you do that in geriatrics. And then in 4th year, they offer emergency and ortho, which I was actually in Canada doing and then had to come back because of COVID. But keeping COVID aside, there's lots of opportunities at UQ for doing international rotations, mainly ones I think if you want to do them back in Canada and the States, but obviously like your observership and your elective are ones you could do anywhere in the world. And that's actually a big reason why I ended up choosing UQ versus other, I guess, Australian universities, because for me personally, I was only looking in Australia or Canada at that time.
Thank you. And yes, so when hopefully the situation will change in the future, that there will be international travel allowed and that you'll be able to have some of those similar experiences to Jackie. Brandon, I've got a question here asking, can Ochsner students do away rotations outside of the Ochsner Clinical School?
So you can definitely do away rotations for outside of Ochsner. For most years, that has always been something that we do. I personally was going to do an away rotation at LSU, which is still in New Orleans, but COVID shut it down. I had already been approved, I was ready to go, and sadly I got the email like a week before we were supposed to start and said, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we're only staying with home program students. But during normal times, yes, away rotations are welcome 100%.
Yeah, and I feel like that has been answered a lot of questions in normal times. This is, we're in our new normal, and hopefully our new normal will look different, in the future as well. Donald, I wonder if I can direct a residency question to you, just asking about what support's available when students are looking at applying to residency programs.
Sorry, had to unmute myself there. So the support for looking at residency programs from Ochsner it's actually quite substantial. The moment you land in New Orleans, or even beforehand, you start having our dean, Dr. Denton, and the leadership here in New Orleans already start to inform you about the process, some of the resources, some of the online ways to look at, specialties and how to look at different programs. All that stuff is probably very standard for across a lot of medical schools. I think what makes Ochsner stands out in terms of residency support is that once you come to Ochsner and you start working with the attendings here, we are the only medical student body cohort at Ochsner hospitals, which means the attendings, you get all their attention, and a lot of them are well connected and they can help guide you in that process for looking at residencies, deciding on which career to pick. And I think that's important because if you look at other international schools, they don't necessarily have a home base. Some of the international schools, they rotate throughout the country and there's no set hospital for them to just be stationed at. So I think that's a very unique factor of Ochsner for residency support.
Thank you. And Priya, we have a question asking what sets, the UQ medical program apart from other, medical schools, say in the Caribbean, Atlantic Bridge, universities and that. So following on from what Donald was saying, I mean, did you want to talk maybe about some of the factors that you looked at in choosing UQ over possibly other international medical school opportunities?
Sure. So I felt like a lot of the other international schools that Americans go to are, solely for Americans who maybe didn't get into American schools or didn't get into the school of their choice. But whereas UQ is already an established medical school with Australian and international students already. It's one of the top 50, I think, in the world. So you're getting a good education. That's why I chose it. And also the opportunity to have a home base in New Orleans instead of rotating around the country was another factor.
Thank you. Jackie, I wonder if you are able to talk about, so questions that students are thinking if they plan to stay in Australia, and that might be something that you're looking at the moment. If you maybe want to talk to that, I can add some detail as well.
Yeah, sure. And also I'm trying to answer questions that people are typing. So if we haven't gotten to it, I'm trying to get through to the Canadian specific ones. But in terms of staying in Australia, that's actually something I'm very much considering. So in order to do that, you do your 4 years of medical school, and then you have to do a year of internship here, which is the year that will give you your general registration. So if you wanted to work longer in Australia, you have to do this internship year. Or let's just say you wanted to go back to Canada and then decided, oh, I want to go back to Australia, you would still have to do this internship year, if that makes sense. So for me, I'm definitely going to stay and do that internship year, get my general registration in Australia. And then from there, if you want to stay longer, you can just continue working as a junior doctor and work your way up the ranks. I actually should just take a step back. I realized the way the medical system works in Australia is quite different to Canada, and I'm pretty sure the US as well, but I can't speak as much for that. Where in Canada, you go to medical school, you apply for your residency, and then you go right into whatever specialty you get accepted to or interested in, whether that's family practice, surgery, internal med, etc. In Australia, it doesn't work like that. So in Australia, you do your 4 years of medical school, you do your internship year, like I said, and then after that, a lot of doctors will work for a few years and work towards applying to whatever specialty they're interested in. So the process here definitely does take a bit more time, which sometimes can be a bit daunting when you think about that. But on the flip side, I also think it's a good thing because it gives you a lot more general experience as working as a doctor rather than jumping into a certain specialty right away. But everyone's very different in terms of if you know exactly what you want to do and maybe it will take you a long time to do that, then yeah, completely, if you want to just try to get right into that. But in Australia, it will probably take you a bit longer to get there. So hopefully that answers those questions. Feel free to ask any more about that. I'm happy to talk a bit about the, I guess, immigration side of things as well, based on what I know about that.
Well, that's very helpful and spot on. And I think the other thing to highlight is that the internship year it's a paid internship, as is the other junior doctor training years are paid as well. And although there are similarities between Canada and Australia and Australia and the US, one of the major differences is that universities in Australia don't do the postgraduate medical education. So after you graduate, the internship year is managed through either Queensland Health, which is our state government health department, or there are federally funded internships as well. And so that's a difference as well. I wanted to throw a question to any of the panelists because we do have a question from a student who's asking about applicants with a chronic illness and what UQ offers in terms of any disability support for students.
I can start that one off. So I have a few friends in the cohort that do have chronic illnesses, and I will say that obviously I haven't gone through the process myself doing it, but they have always said that UQ has been very supportive with testing accommodations, making sure that their needs are met. They always have an open line of communication with the school, the faculty, to support resources for any of their needs. And so far, every time I've talked to them, they're progressing along fine with their education. The school is aware of their situation, and in return, they're able to try to work without any interruptions in their education. So even though I myself haven't gone through that process of applying for that and working in that area, I do know that my friends who have chronic illnesses have so far been able to go through medical school just fine, and in fact, say they're often appreciative of the extra support that they can have access to.
Very good, thank you. And Brandon, I've got a few questions coming through about the application process. And I know, again, one of the differences is that UQ Medicine doesn't look at a lot of supporting documentation that US med schools look at. So I wonder if you just could talk about your, experience of applying to UQ Medicine.
Applying to UQ Medicine or applying to residencies in the US?
No, applying to study medicine at UQ.
Okay, so for your normal applying to UQ, it's very similar to, I guess, the requirements, the things they're asking for were very similar to what you would apply with to US medical schools. So, you want to do a personal statement, letter of rec, and send to the application. Then there's going to be, if you meet the criteria of, the minimum scores, minimum, et cetera, grades, things like that, then you'll be invited for an interview. And they do kind of like a multi-mini interview system. So you'll have multiple, I believe it's 10-minute interviews over and over again. And you'll talk to anywhere from people from, current physicians to current students to anybody else who they deem that they'd like to assist with the interview process, and you'll get your acceptance or your news from there.
No, that's great. And I think, again, it's one of the differences, and I would say this for Canadian applicants as well, is that it's a pretty straightforward process. So it's actually 8 stations, Brandon, for our multiple mini interviews, which we have completely pivoted to offering all of them online this year because of travel restrictions around the world. And what I would say, I think medical students tend to be stressful people at the best of times, and it does stress them out that we don't, ask for personal statements or letters of recommendation and so on. And there's a couple of reasons around that, and we, particularly for this kind of program where we're asking you to, hey, think about moving halfway around the world. Set yourself up in Australia, and if you're in the Ochsner cohort, then 2 years after you get here, we say, hey, do it all over again, travel to New Orleans, and a lot of the Ochsner students haven't been there or aren't from New Orleans and so on. And so we attract a particular kind of student, and I think particularly in this year, there's a lot of discussion around resiliency, and I think we're attracting the kinds of students, like Priya said, she was looking for a global experience. Jackie may not have thought about staying in Australia when she first came here, but now that's a consideration. So we're not getting thousands of applications because our student pool, it's much smaller than there would be at a Canadian medical school or a US medical school, because we're attracting a particular kind of student. And so in some ways, we don't need then all of that other supporting documentation to kind of winnow through the volume of applications. We get hundreds, not thousands. And so we are able to, utilize the MMI as the best predictor for selecting students that are going to succeed, in our medicine program. So please don't be nervous when, we say, look, that's great, you have a personal statement, that's great, you have letters of recommendation. It's just not part of our application process. And I think it's just somewhere else where Australia is different. Yes, Brandon.
I would like to add that it was very straightforward. It has been 4 years since I did my application, but I do remember it being a lot less of a hassle than going through the AAMC and applying for the US schools.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Couple questions here just that we can quickly run through. So our expected class size for 2021. So we have 2 intakes for international students. For the UQ Ochsner MD program, that you spend 2 years at UQ and then 2 years at the Ochsner Clinical School in New Orleans, we'll take about 90 students in 2021. For our international student cohort, we're looking to have approximately 100 international students start with us in 2021. And our international cohort is diverse. We get a lot of Canadians, obviously represented by Jackie here today, but we also get students from Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and so on. So we're quite a diverse cohort as well. And as Donald referenced, you are in a group of students, not just all US students, not just all Canadian students, not just all Australian students, but we mix everyone together. So none of our panelists actually did the MMI, like attended as an applicant, because we only started the MMIs last year. Some of you may have participated, as one of the interviewers. So I've got a student here who's asking, I have my MMI tomorrow. Will the interviewer ask me questions throughout, or should I be prepared to talk the entire time? So who'd like to give some advice to this applicant?
So I was one of the MMI interviewers before. So they will give you, so first off, don't stress. They'll give you very clear instructions before your interview starts. MMI interviews they sometimes can be kind of scary because it's instructed not to give real-time feedback. We're there to listen to you and to listen to your responses, which can sometimes, I know, feel uncomfortable because you're just listening to yourself talk for a little bit. I would say that the most important things, and I'm sure everybody knows this, is make sure you have good lighting, good, nice, stable internet connection, because we're trying very hard to listen to your responses, and it can sometimes be tough if you're cutting in and out. So the interviews will, they'll all be very organized in terms of the stations and all that. We have a moderator to make sure it all runs very smoothly.
Thank you. Priya, we've got another question. I'm going to ask you to answer this one. An applicant asking about how studying medicine internationally has changed your perspective about studying medicine and the delivery of medicine.
Sure. So I think, as Donald said, you get to interact with people from so many different countries, which, and you do that every day, whether it's like your peers or professors, and that in itself gives you a different perspective on medicine. Also, you realize the differences between the US and Australian healthcare systems, which I think is pretty cool. And can you hear me? Sorry, okay. And I think you can bring back that knowledge when you go to Ochsner. So yeah, I think every day is basically a learning experience, just listening to perspectives from people from all over the world.
Thank you very much. I noticed on the Q&A line, we're getting lots of questions about residency matches and so on. We do have, information, specific information about where previous graduates, both from the Ochsner program, but also from our regular international program, where they have a match back in their home countries, in the US and Canada. So I'm rather than asking our panelists to speak to some of the specifics, I'm going to refer you to our website to actually please, review and look at that information. But I wonder if any of the panelists want to share, perhaps now, in terms of their preparation. A student asked about applying to residencies in California. I don't know if that's of interest to any of our panelists, but if you want to talk maybe about your current status when you're looking for residency programs post-graduation.
I can comment a bit on the California one because I'm from California and I was able to set up an away elective as well there before COVID kind of hit us all. I think one of the things about the residencies and all that's stressing a lot of people out, and including myself when I first started, is that there's this common perception that because you're the IMG that it's going to be a lot more difficult and the hurdles. What I didn't realize though until coming into Ochsner was how strong the Ochsner network is with the attendings at the hospitals. That's something that's very hard to glean just looking at websites and looking at numbers and match statistics. And I'm sure Brandon can attest, the Ochsner network is huge. There's hundreds of different attendings that all did their training and residencies in the US. And what I will comment on is that if you are looking for a way to make connections and network and get your name out there for residency matching, Ochsner definitely provides those doors for you. Beyond that, it can be a very individualized process, but I will say that that's a huge benefit of being at Ochsner that I didn't really realize until I'm here.
Thank you. Jackie, we have a specific question. Students are asking, how much time do you spend on campus or in the hospital when you are studying medicine in Brisbane?
Okay, so this changes between phase 1 and phase 2. So in phase 1, that's kind of, I always think of it in my head as like the theory years. So I guess more a bit like the undergrad setting. So in those 2 years, I'm just trying to think back. In first year, you're on campus, probably the most you'll be in all 4 years, just because your lectures, at least this was when I was in first and second year, so I don't know if it's changed. But in first year, your lectures will be on campus, your CBLs, your case-based learnings will be on campus. So first year, you're mainly on campus, I'd say. But lectures are also recorded. So if you learn better by watching recordings, that's also an option. But there's still the in-person if that's how you learn better. For second year, you shift more to spending time at the clinical unit at a hospital. That's usually where your case-based learning is, your clinical coaching. Oh, and first year, I guess first and second year, you also have anatomy, which is on campus. But in general, first year mainly on campus, second year you start to shift to the clinical units in the hospital, and then third and fourth year, you're pretty much just at the hospital the entire time. Yeah.
Thank you. Brandon, we have a very specific question, which I'm going to ask you to answer. When does Oshner do their white coat ceremony? Could you maybe talk a little bit about that experience for you and your family?
The white coat ceremony? It's fun. So normally for your domestic students, they receive their white coat during year one. However, the white coats aren't really such a thing in Australia. So when we come back during our third year, it's kind of like that's our moment. It's like you're finally entering your clinical rotations. So it's just kind of a nice kind of way to get all the families together. It almost kind of symbolizes like a welcome home. So you and your friends that you've made over the last 2 years, which you actually, surprisingly, we bond very, very quickly because you kind of go to Australia not knowing anybody, but you do know that we all are in the same boat. So the Oxners tend to bond very closely. But when you return year 3, you get to meet all their family. You get to meet any friends that come with them. You go up on stage, you receive your white coat from your advisor and from whoever's the keynote speaker that day. It's a nice ceremony overall.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just go to a general question that I'll ask all of our panelists to answer. And Priya, I'd like to start with you. And I wonder, think back to when you were a prospective medical student looking at medical schools and so on. What was something that maybe you weren't expecting to experience when you first came to UQ? And Priya, I'll start with you, please.
Sure. I guess a couple things. I wasn't. I really like as Brandon said, that when we all got here and we're in this new country all alone, we bonded really fast. Like within a week, like people had a lot of friends. Like it was really nice. And then even now, like I also didn't expect to travel as much as I did first year. Not anymore, obviously, because of COVID, but first year during the breaks, there's so much to see in Australia and around like New Zealand. So besides studying as much, which I kind of did expect, medical school is hard, it's a marathon. I wasn't expecting to actually be able to have fun as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. And yes, I think Brisbane and New Orleans tend to be a good match because we both enjoy, having fun. And so, Donald, maybe could you talk about something that you perhaps weren't expecting when you first came to Australia?
Well, I wasn't expecting how hot it was. But that's just my own personal thing. I remember landing, I was like, wow, the sun is really burning on me right now. One thing I didn't quite expect was how many opportunities there were to get involved in outside of medicine. So Queensland is a huge university, and that trickles down to the medical school as well. Jackie knows that there's a soccer team that I played on, the Hurston Hatchets, which is made up of medical school, not just students, but actually some of the doctors in the local hospitals. There's some alumni of UQ. There's also the Queensland Medical Orchestra, and my CBL tutor, which is the small group that we have, was actually the conductor for it, and he was a UQ doctor alum. So I got to participate in both of those activities and just got to see, you start to realize that being a UQ medical student, you're not just at the school, you're really part of a larger community. And that was something I didn't realize until actually going to Brisbane. And then, when you go out to the community and they ask, where you're from and what are you doing here, you start to realize how prevalent the UQ school of medicine really is in the community. And it's really nice to be a part of that.
Thank you very much. And Jackie, I'll ask you to talk about something that you found was unexpected. And I know on the chat lines, we're getting lots of questions, specific questions about rotations in Canada and so on. And so what we're not able to answer now, I'll make sure that my colleagues update our information on our website, and we'll respond to all of the queries electronically. But Jackie, what did you experience when you first came to Australia that perhaps you weren't expecting?
Okay, so I actually lived in Australia before coming for med school for 6 months. So I'm trying to think. I think for me, since I'd been here before and I traveled around Australia when I was here, I initially, when I was here on my exchange, that's when I was here before, Brisbane was not my top city when I visited it. But then when I moved here and lived here, I love living in Brisbane. I really enjoy the weather. I love the heat. It's basically sunny all year round, which I enjoy. And I just kind of like how it's it just feels like a big town to me rather than like a city, even though it's still a city. So you get kind of like the positives of a city without it feeling like a city, if that makes sense, which is something I really enjoy. So I think for me, since I'd been here before, I wasn't expecting to, I think, like Brisbane as much as I do, which was like great for me. So.
That's great. Let me guess, you were in Sydney the first time?
No, Melbourne.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, as you know, a lot of interstate rivalry between the three
Yeah.
largest cities in Australia. Sydney and Melbourne usually are the ones, going head to head.
Yeah.
Brisbane's considered to be the poor country cousin, but I think you're right. I think that's a great description of Brisbane because it does have all the amenities of a big city without some of the issues that bigger cities tend to have. Brandon, lucky last, what was something that you weren't expecting when you first came to Australia?
So I think I kind of agree with Priya, honestly. I wasn't expecting to have as much, self-structured time as I had. Pretty much as long, and I actually answered this in one of the Q&A questions, but if you essentially work throughout the week, you can go to lectures or at least listen to lectures. I personally like going to lecture in person because it's stuck with me more. You go to your CBLs, you go to your tutorials, you feel pretty set. And as long as you do your work through your week, come the weekends and come the holidays, like you can do whatever you'd like. I was able to go travel, I think like 4 different countries while I was there. And this is I didn't even own a passport until about 2 months prior to going to Australia. So I'd never even left the US. Also, I think I wasn't expecting to leave with as many Australian and Canadian friends as I have. So now currently I'm on nights in the emergency department, which is kind of nice because during the day I call my Australian friends and I get to chat with them because they're off. So, we talk about whenever I come back, whenever I come visit, where we're going to go do surf trips, and my friends in Canada, whenever we graduate, where we're going to go skiing, and just different things like that. I guess it's a combination between both Donald and Priya. I had a lot of self-structured time and became part of a larger community. It was nice.
Thank you very much. And yes, normally when we ask students, about their Australian experience, at least one, usually more than one, mentions the heat. Because we start in the middle of our Australian summer, so particularly for students coming from the Northern Hemisphere, it can be a bit of a shock when they first arrive. We're also getting lots of questions, admissions type questions, for January 2021. We have run some others, webinars specifically to answer admissions questions. That information is also available on our website. So please feel free to refer to that information and also reach out to us. So as I said at the beginning, we are currently, hoping that we will be able to welcome students on campus in January 2021. And once there is any kind of a firm decision around that, we'll communicate that to students. The Australian government is at the moment processing visa applications. So if you are in that offer stage where you've accepted your offer and so on, you can apply for your student visa and so on. So again, we are in a fluid situation. So we'll keep our applicants updated, with any information that we have closer to the end of the year. I want to ask a final question of all of our panelists, because this comes across a lot in our questions as well, is how you manage stress as a medical student. And Priya, I might start with you, please.
Sure. So I personally like to draw and paint. So I usually, whenever I'm too stressed or my brain is fried from studying, will do that. I also am pretty social, so I surround myself with people my friends. I also talk to my family a lot, which has been kind of hard because of the time difference. That was one of the things that when I came here, I struggled with, because when I was stressed, like it would be an awkward time to call home, but you kind of get used to it. There are also a lot of medical student support resources here, people you can talk to if you're really feeling overwhelmed. Yeah.
Thank you. And Brandon, I might come to you next. How do you manage stress as a medical student?
So during phase one, I definitely relied on my friends a lot and used those weekends. Like I said, you get very close with your CBL, which are your small groups. So it could be anything from potluck dinners with them to hiking or beach trips. And one of the nice things about where Brisbane is centered, it's anywhere from an hour to 2 hours from either like rainforest, mountain hikes, beaches, or anything else that you could possibly think of. So I'm very big on outdoors. So I like getting outside, getting some fresh air. Maybe getting out of the city a little bit. Here during phase two, I tend to do a lot of the same thing. Actually, I try to get outside. And so I live close to Tulane University, and they have a big soccer field, so I'll go out there and kick the ball around. We made a trip up to Tennessee not long ago and just went hiking. So just doing everything we can right now to stay social distance. And I guess outdoors is a good thing to be a social distance activity.
Thank you very much. And Jackie, I'd like to ask you how you manage stress. And we interviewed some of our Canadian graduates in Canada last year and filmed them for some testimonials and that. And they all mentioned the coffee in Australia. And I wonder if you wanted to talk about that as well.
The coffee. So I don't drink coffee, but it's like very good here. There's a very big coffee culture. I remember when I moved to Melbourne, I was like very surprised by that. And I actually worked at a cafe there, and they're just like going to a cafe and getting just like drip coffee is not a thing here. Like you will not really find that. It's just, yeah, no, there's a huge coffee culture. The coffee is really good. Doctors and hospitals always get coffee. Often will like buy one for you. So good coffee culture. In terms of handling stress, exercise is a big stress reliever for me. I like running. So often if I'm feeling really stressed, I'll like go on a run or go to the gym. Another thing is just finding some, a good group of friends when you get here, to support each other. I find a lot of the times if I'm stressed, I'll also reach out to friends, because I also find like sometimes the times when I'm most stressed, it's hard to call home because of the time difference. So just obviously having some people here as well that you're able to reach out to is really nice. And then, yeah, trying to organize times to talk to people at home as well when it works with the time difference, are kind of the main things that I've done to help relieve my stress with medical school.
Thank you, and thank you for answering coffee questions as a non-coffee drinker, but I think that also represents the importance of coffee for Australians. Donald, I wonder if I can ask you to talk about how you manage stress, and I know as part of our student leadership group, this would be a big topic of discussion as well, as how we support our medical students.
Yeah, so just to start off with me personally, I do a lot of the same things Brandon, Priya, and Jackie mentioned: exercise, finding a really strong group of friends that you can talk to and debrief about what you're going through. I'll also be open. I mentioned I'm older. I also have a family, so talking to my family, my wife, is very important for me, and making sure I'm grounded. From a student organization perspective, there are a lot of resources out there, and there's resources back at UQ. There are student interest groups that specialize specifically in the well-being and wellness of students and how they're going through the stressors of medical school. And then Auctioner as well. There's our insurance covers a number of visits with support groups and counselors that you can take advantage of. It's all included. And also our leadership faculty, their lines are always open for people to call. I've heard of students calling, our deans directly, when they have to talk about something. So I think that level of support it's good to know that they're there for you. And everybody's aware that, especially for the U.S. students, and the cross-country move can be very stressful. You know, everybody deals with differently. Everybody has different circumstances, and they're very aware of that and very supportive. They work all year round for us, and I think that's a very special part of this of the Oxford community.
Thank you very much, and I think we'll end here. I know we've got lots of questions that we haven't responded to directly, but as I said, we'll follow up and provide some more information. I encourage you all as well to look at some of our previous recorded webinars, and we'll also run monthly webinars, you know, between now and the end of the year on different topics. So please feel free to come back and join us again and email your questions as well. I really want to thank our student panelists. Your input is just so invaluable to talk to prospective students about what the experience is like for you. So thank you very much to Brandon, Jackie, Donald, and Priya. And I wish you all a safe and wonderful rest of your afternoon, evening, day. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good night.
you.
Thank you.